This has now become like my meditation chair. The perfect amount of space. I have like this huge pad for some lumbar support, right? Like it's perfect. I'm loving it. It has been on my heart, to share, to address the idea of white workspaces. There is always so much information that I can add to my arsenal. One thing that I feel as though I have earned a doctorate with additional credits in is whiteness and white spaces and being Black in said white spaces. When you have done a thing your entire life, you begin to build up coping mechanisms, resources, but you also have a mind that is kind of tailored to be able to identify the practices of those spaces in any setting. Even if the setting changes, you know what it sounds, feels, smells, and looks like, right?
I'm like...
So that's both a blessing and a curse, right? It's something that Black marginalized folks do for protection, but it's also an added burden to have to carry around that tool set, because it means that some part of you is always waiting to see what's about to be around the corner. And so one of the things that I've been really grateful to have learned later in life so well is the idea of energetic boundaries, right? We hear a lot of this more and more as people kind of raise their awareness of both mental health, of energy medicine, of, their bodies just in general, having healthy boundaries. What was really helpful for me to know or to understand about boundaries is that this is not me just blocking any and everything that comes my way that I don't like, that I'm not feeling, that I don't want to deal with, right? Because some stuff we need to be able to absorb and observe and take note of and grow with. Other things, they don't have any business being in our space. And so when I learned is that boundaries are not just about the other person. Boundaries are truly about your reclaiming control of self, right? Your readjustment of yourself within the situation in order to find yourself in a space, an angle that best serves you and creates the kind of reality that you desire to progress, right? That you desire for your overall well-being. I wanted to connect that specifically to white spaces, and more specifically to white workspaces, because you build up a binder, if you will, of experiences so that you'll know how to identify them in new places. And so one of the things that I have built up a binder of is behaviors, patterns of white workspaces. And I want to specify that this is not unique, unfortunately, to white spaces, right? Like it doesn't have to be just white folks around in the space. We are all swimming in the same soup. We have all been raised in these same systems, so a lot of this has been absorbed into our own practices. And so many times the awareness of this is also doing us a service of detaching ourselves from the learned behaviors of whiteness that we are also affected by. No one is immune. Nobody is safe. The kind of practices, the norms, the patterns, the behaviors of white spaces. Let's be real. We don't all always have the immediate privilege of not working the job that has this type of culture, right? Has these type of norms. It is a privilege to be able to walk away from a situation that not all of us are currently afforded, right?
Other Caucasians to the back. Immediately. Honestly, Thank you. Looks better already.
Thinking about addressing the situation that you're in while you're in it, not waiting to be in another situation, not having that kind of destination syndrome of when I get to this place, it'll be okay. And thinking about how can I be okay now, right? So that you are not attracting to the energy of the space, to the energy of other people if it doesn't serve you. So these are really reminders for myself, and this helps serve as a reminder to me as much as I hope it will to you. So the first thing that you can do in order to protect your energy, create some awareness. We can't control how other people will respond, how they'll receive the information, how they'll apply it. What we can control is ourselves. And so our awareness of self is integral in beginning that reclamation of how you are present, how you're showing up in the situation, and how you're experiencing it. And so the awareness, for me, always starts in my body, right? Before it's in my head, it's in my gut, right? It's in my gut, it's in my shoulders. And everybody may experience this thing differently. And so that is why your awareness of your body is so important, because if you can become more aware of what is going on in your body, you can start to see the patterns, you can start to connect those patterns back to specific things. You can draw a line so that you can start to manage and control them, right? And so that awareness of body, thinking about the guiding question of what sensations came up in my body and where when X happened, right? Like, we know ultimately things sometimes move very quickly, and so all we know is that we're left with some kind of feeling, right? Like we have an either strong or a subtle feeling of didn't like that, right? But if we can start to be more aware and just work to give more attention when we're engaging with others, starting by slowing down, right? And not acting so much out of gotta respond, right? Like, if we slow down when we are engaging with others, if we happen to be triggered by something, stopping in that moment to say, oh, where did I feel that, right? Like, I felt that right here in my gut, or I felt that in my shoulders, I felt that in my forehead. Where did it come up in the body, right? What was the sensation and where did it come up? So that's the first step. Second step is really identification. The reason why we talk about the idea of microaggressions, we talk about kind of like subtle, and sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's blatant, right? The more difficult to address are the micro or subtle aggressions, patterns, and behaviors of white workspaces, because it's hard to be able to connect an intention or a specific outcome to a very small action or behavior that someone themselves either doesn't have awareness of or will not take ownership of having an awareness of. The first thing is really identifying what it is that is triggering, right? So now that I've identified in my body what the sensation is, then I need to identify what the sensation was connected to. What words was it connected to, right? Like, thinking about the question, what about what was said or done caused my nervous system to respond? Because those things that we feel in our bodies, that's our nervous system being like, hey girl, hey, you didn't like that. Pay attention to it. That's not good for you. When I ask myself the question, what about what was just said caused my nervous system to respond? It causes me to slow down, again, have an awareness of what the thing was that caused my body to respond in a physical way, and really try to figure out exactly how you can articulate that to yourself, so that if you need to get to the point, which I don't think you always do, for your benefit, to not have to carry that burden of always educating somebody else, but if you have to get to the point where you need to articulate it to someone else, having thought through and identifying this is exactly the thing and speaking in clear terms that affected me in this way. One of the things that I have noticed from my doctoral work in white spaces is that there's this conflation that has happened for many of us. It is very hard to be white and not have experienced or have some residue of the privilege of whiteness in this space. I'm saying the majority of white folks who have some residue that they may or may not have awareness of existing within their practices, right? I often see there be a conflation of white norms and professionalism, right? We talk about those things as if they are one and the same. And the danger of conflating those two things is that white norms are just that. They are just practices, patterns, behaviors. But because we have grown up in a supremacist system for the entirety of our
me pondering the African diaspora and being temporarily discombobulated.
Our time together, we will say, since we have grown up in the system together, and whiteness, the norms of whiteness have been supreme this entire time that we have engaged in these settings together. That means that white folks have trouble differentiating between what is a necessary thing to happen for professionalism. And professionalism I am defining as a necessity to accomplish the goal or outcomes being addressed in said professional space, right? But we get these two things confused. We say that white norms are just professional just because they have existed forever, when they have zero connection to said necessities that have to be present in order to connect back to the bottom line of whatever work you are trying to accomplish, right? So we do this, smash those two together. When we conflate those two, we punish people for not showing up under the rules of white norms. And the punishments can be as severe, right, as a number of things. That's going to move to my next point, which is this idea of, after I have identified exactly what the thing is that caused my nervous system to respond, I'm moving to how this connects to some fear within me. Because our nervous system responds based on fear. That's not always a bad thing, right? Because sometimes we do need to have fear that motivates us to be able to fight and defend ourselves, right? That is a primal necessity for us to be triggered in that way. Unfortunately, because we have this trauma of settings that should not be dangerous, having a history of potentially leading to dangerous outcomes, we are often wired and triggered in spaces that feel as if they should not be dangerous. From the narrative that goes along with the fear that comes up when we are triggered by certain things within the workspace. So how do we do that? So once I have identified that thing, I need to connect it back to, what do I believe will happen? Why is this thing making me fearful? And what is the story that I'm telling myself? What is the narrative connected to the fear? Because our fears often cause us to be triggered and cause us to respond in a certain way in order to avoid a certain outcome that has yet to happen, right? It exists in our head. It serves us to take a pause and understand what has happened already, what I'm fearful of happening, and differentiate between the two, right? Because this one has already been a reality. This one has yet to be a reality, and I still am existing here in the middle, in that moment of being able to take information from what has already happened in order to determine how I want to operate in the present moment before this, catastrophic narrative that we may have in our mind takes place. So not being connected, actively working to detach yourself. I wish that earlier on I could have known that. I think that I would have thought very differently about my contributions to the work that I've done. I think that I would maybe have stayed in spaces longer or shown up very differently in those spaces, right? Or maybe I would have left spaces earlier. The practice of slowing everything down, so taking a pause first, right? Instead of just responding out of whatever. If I respond immediately, it's 9 times out of 10 it's going to be an emotional response, and it may not even be exactly what I feel or think. It's just like, I need to address it.
Get your ass in line.
And so taking a step back from having to respond immediately, pausing, processing, right? Doing all of those things that we said before, having an awareness within your body, having an understanding or an identification of what your nervous system is responding to.
3, 2, 1. 1, 2, 3. What the heck is bothering me?
Identifying the fear that it's connected to and the narrative that is connected to the fear. And then we take some breaths, right? Because the breath, prana, life force, is just that, because it regulates our nervous system. And so when we take a pause and we take a breath and we're able to recenter ourselves, and that can be as simple as taking inhales into and out of the nose, right? Pacing the breath so that we're matching the count of the inhale to the count of the exhale, or inhaling to a certain count and then exhaling just a little bit longer, right? There are many different ways, many different practices, many different pranayama, breath work practices that we can put in place in order to get ourselves back to a point of, now that I've understood that my nervous system is responding to this thing that has happened, now I'm going to figure out how to get my nervous system back to good. Because first and foremost, I need to be good. Everything else can come after. And everything else that comes after will likely be better if I'm back to good, if I'm back to regulated and centered in my nervous system response. Stepping back, taking a pause, taking some breaths, figuring out how to address whatever it is that you are dealing with from a more neutral space, from a space that is connected to your higher self. Here are a few tools that I have also found to be useful. So the first of those that I found to be useful is the reframing of passive aggressiveness. So one of the top patterns, behaviors I've experienced in white workspaces is passive aggressiveness. Pretending that what I am saying is harmless. We may all have a working description of passive aggressiveness, and please feel free to share if you have some examples. Interesting thing on that is that you can't prove another person's intention. I'm not going to try. I pull the passive aggressiveness out of that space of haziness, and if it pushes you to ask in pretty clear terms, which allows you to give the benefit of the doubt, right? If anyone has read the 4 Agreements, one of the agreements is this idea of, I am going to give you the benefit of the doubt first, right? If I think a thing, because I can create a narrative in my mind and it could be completely, made up. It could not be the other person's intention. And so in order to clarify if I feel a thing, then I can ask you, right? And the way that asking may look is, I think what I'm hearing you say is this, but I want to be certain, right? Having done those list of things, taking a pause, taking some breaths, addressing the concern from a more neutral space allows us to process and identify what it is that we think is happening so that we can articulate it to that person, right? I want you to know how this hit me how this came across to me so that we don't have to have conflict, right? So it both is giving the benefit of the doubt, and it is an olive branch to say, if you meant something different, then share with me how you intended that to come across, so that I give you an opportunity to give me a better understanding of exactly what it was that you were trying to say. So it actually does serve as a good tool, especially if, you know, like you were just having a bad day and somebody said something that was harmless in their intention. You were like, right? Like, we can be on edge because we have years and years of race-based trauma, right? Like, that's real. Directly addressing it. It can often feel in white workspaces as if we are all being asked to adjust to meet the norm, right? Like, the norm is the model, and often that's a white norm, this list of things. And so sometimes we, by nature, cannot meet the norm because we are not white people. Other things are just practices that have been patterns of behavior, right? And so if you are constantly being asked to show up, to do your work in a certain way that is based in a white norm, that is exhausting over time, right? It picks away at us. We're constantly being asked to be something outside of ourselves. And this is not just for white folks, this is for anyone. These are learned behaviors. I am going to find every opportunity I can in this work to show up as who I authentically am. I'm going to first have an awareness of self. So who am I, right? Like, who am I? What is unique to me? How do I feel most myself when I am expressing or doing whatever this work is? And how can I find opportunities to personalize my work to my unique voice, my unique vibration, right? Like this, I had this shirt on and I was like, oh, that's perfect. The world needs what you have. We all came here we have a different frequency that is specific and unique to us. Each of us comes here with a different vibration, and the world literally needs you to live into your vibration, to honor that, right? To show up as that. That is why we are here, in my opinion. So when you find opportunities for you to show up as who you uniquely are, then not only does that kind of honor and give you more space to feel as if you are enjoying the work that you're doing, you're also going to be better at it. But as soon as I started looking at the roles that I was both seeking and the work that I was doing within the roles that I show up in, as saying, okay, so this is the assignment. So what is my unique perspective on that assignment, and how can I most connect this back to something that resonates with me? Because that's how it's going to come across best to you when it's time to go, right? As I mentioned earlier, we don't always have the luxury of being able to leave a role. But when you do, and if you can plan towards doing that, you should honor yourself by giving yourself the opportunity to take the moments that you have on this earth to be working towards something that best serves you, right? We spend most of our life, most of the hours of our life are spent working. And so if I'm going to be working in this space in order to survive, to feed myself, to feed my family, then either I'm going to be able to honor myself so that I'm having the best experience that I can out of it, or I am going to work towards creating a new reality for myself, right? So the first step of that is really identifying when there is a mismatch there, and then being willing to put the energy and the faith, right? The belief the kind of our thoughts create our realities. And so the manifestation and the scripting of saying, number one, I have faith in the fact that there is a role that best fits me and serves my my unique vibration. And because I believe that that is available to me, I am now calling in all that I need to from the universe in order to get me from point A to point B. From this role, which it feels like I have to have right now, and I'm releasing that and saying, there are infinite possibilities. Bring them to me, universe. I'm ready to accept all that is available to me, right? And then putting the energy and the action behind that and saying, while I'm working this role to have, this position, then I'm going to start identifying exactly what my ideal workspace looks like and taking actions to find that, right? So that it is called into me and manifesting that joint. So, thank you for coming to today's TED Talk. I hope that for anyone who has had the experiences of race-based trauma in white workspaces, I wish you the very best. I wish for you to find a space that serves your highest self, serves your highest vibration. And if that space you believe is where you are currently and it just needs some tweaking, I wish you the best management, control, reclamation of your energetic boundaries so that you can be your highest self in whatever workspace you enter. So, please comment thoughts, questions, ideas below. Ashe.